Welcome to Showdown. I'm Mark Kasen, and it is Thursday, and that's July 31st, last day of July. And, gee, what are we talking about today? Well, I'm not going to spend the whole show talking about Epstein, but that is what everybody's talking about still today. Honestly, Donald is getting himself into dramatically more trouble on this, simply because he can't close his mouth. Every time he talks, someone is figuring out dates and times and all other kinds of things that he's claiming. And the next thing you know, people are saying, wait a minute, didn't he say something else 3 days ago? Or what about 10 days ago? Or what about these other claims he's making? And it's all caving in on this man's head. And it's what everybody has always said, and what I said last week, or at the beginning of the week. But everybody says it all the time, and that is that when people get in trouble, it tends to be the cover-up that gets them there. It's not so much what they did as the cover-up of what everybody is claiming. And that's where Donald is burying himself. Now, in this case, there's also some potential evidence that he may be in trouble not only for the cover-up, but also for what he did. So it could be a combination when looking at Donald's situation. Here's the problem. In the first place, Ghislaine Maxwell said she never did anything wrong. Now, she was found guilty of all these things, and she's got 20 years, but she's never owned up to it. And she has claimed over and over that first, she didn't do it, and secondly, she's not sorry because she didn't do it. So no remorse, and a lot of people are talking about that, especially the people who were the victims of all of this, the survivors. But beyond all of that, and beyond the investigation of possibly what the Assistant Attorney General interviewed Ghislaine Maxwell about just last week, when everybody says that he should not have been interviewing her at all, and nobody should even be considering whether this woman is going to get a pardon. And yet, that's still some of the conversation that's going on. And Donald has stoked that argument to the nth degree, saying that he has the right to pardon this lady if he wants to, which presumably he does. But the question is, why would he want to? And possibly that might have something to do with the idea that she might say, which he is probably encouraging right now, that Donald didn't do anything wrong. Well, let's back up on that one. Donald says he was angry with Epstein, and he threw Epstein out of Mar-a-Lago because Epstein was stealing his employees. Well, it turns out that the employees he was stealing happened to be young girls. And these are young girls who were working at Mar-a-Lago, and there's all kinds of consideration underway right now that suggests that maybe Donald had some involvement in all of that in the first place. Maybe. The question is being raised. Some of the survivors are also asking questions and making some suggestions as well. And all of this is threatening to come down on Donald Trump's head. He could have gotten rid of this weeks ago if he'd have just stopped talking. But the man can't. He just keeps on talking. And he talks himself into corners, and he talks himself into trouble, and he talks himself into new accusations. And here we are at the end of July, still talking about Epstein. I promise you, you can turn on all the news shows tonight, and you're going to hear all this Epstein talk. Now, I'm going to stop here. I'm not going to do this all night. I'm just going to say that Trump has begun to bury himself even further, and he just won't stop. And I guess the truth is he can't. He doesn't know how, because everything that comes out of his mouth is a lie, and every new lie puts him in a different position of jeopardy, because he raises new questions that people look at and say, wait a minute, that's not the original timetable. That's not the original people who were involved. There are things going on here which he said didn't happen before, and now says, well, maybe some of them did happen. Maybe there were some conversations. Maybe he was involved in some things where he didn't belong. Who knows? The problem is, Ghislaine Maxwell does know. And what is she going to say about all this? That no one can guess right now, and everybody is trying to figure it out. Stephanie Rule is on MSNBC. She's been talking about this for the last hour tonight. I've been driving in here, listening to see if there's any news, and everything is Epstein. No end to this. And Donald hates it, and he doesn't know how to stop it. And, you know, even if he did have an idea of how to stop it, apparently he couldn't do it because it would require that he stop talking. He's not capable of that one. Okay, so I'm going to completely move on from Epstein. I took less than 10 minutes, and I think I'm going to stop completely for the night and move on to some other conversations that are far more important to the American people right now. And I think I'm going to start with, I could talk about the EPA and greenhouse gases. I could do that, but I think I'm going to pass on that for a minute. And I think I'm going to go directly to the tariffs, because this is the deadline. Tomorrow is the deadline for these tariff agreements. So let's deal with that one, with the economic piece, and then we can go talk about some of these other issues, which are extremely serious and economically complex as well, but might not be as important to the public right now as some of the things like, you know, what's the tariff going to be on India? What's the tariff going to be on China? What's the tariff going to be on Canada? How about Mexico? All these countries. Everybody trying to figure out where this is going. And Donald promising that he's got a deal for everybody that's going to be consummated by midnight tonight. And frankly, everybody knows that that is absolutely not happening. There is no deal that's about to be worked out. In fact, it's so amazing because here, I'll describe it this way. First of all, let's take the EU. There's supposed to be a deal with the EU. That was supposed to have been made 3-4 days ago. They supposedly signed some kind of an agreement. At the time, Great Britain said, yeah, looking pretty good. Certainly from their standpoint it was. They were a little bit happy with the deal that was being made. However, Great Britain is not the only country in Europe. Obviously, there's France, there's Germany, there's Italy, whole bunch of countries, actually 28 countries in the EU, and a lot of them are very unhappy with where the deals are standing right now. And as an example, One of the headlines in the Wall Street Journal just yesterday was that Macron in France is saying that these are some of the darkest days in France's economic history as a result of whatever the deal is that's been concocted with Donald Trump, which actually, as he says, there's no deal. There are just demands being made by Trump and agreements which are not being agreed to by other countries. So, as I've always said, when Donald tells you he's got an agreement, I remember 8 years ago, he said he had an agreement with China. China said, no, there's no agreement, there's no deal. And Donald kept saying there was, and China kept saying there wasn't, and clearly there was not. Today, we're in the same situation. Donald claims that he's got deals with everybody. But everybody says there are no such deals. Now, let's talk about, some of the really problem areas here. And one of those areas would definitely be Canada. And Canada is in an interesting situation, along with most of the EU, because they are saying that they're going to recognize a Palestinian state. In fact, they're saying that the name of the state is Palestine, and that it is now, as far as Europe and Canada is concerned, it is an independent state over in the Middle East, right next to Israel. Now, naturally, Israel says, no way, we're not even thinking about this. That doesn't exist. But in fact, important countries around the world are recognizing that there is a Palestinian state, that it is now officially known as Palestine. Donald Trump says Canada is going to pay a price for recognizing this Palestinian state. In fact, they're saying the price is going to be an enormous tariff that is going to pound down on the Canadian heads just north, and that this is going to be a major fight, and that Donald is going to stick to it, he says. The old story, taco, Trump always chickens out. Well, Trump says he's not going to chicken out on this one. He says he's going to go all the way, and he is going to bring hellfire to Canada, along with some other problems, including gigantic costs, which, by the way, in many cases will blow back against the United States as well. So it's not like this is a simple situation. It's very complex, but it certainly threatens both Canada and United States consumers. So let's get off of Canada for a moment, and let's take another look at one of the other countries that's recognizing a Palestinian state, and that happens to be France. As Macron said, this deal that they're making creates one of the darkest days in France's economic history. And here we are, a couple of days past even that proclamation, and with France identifying itself as another one of the countries that is going to recognize a Palestinian state, that puts Donald in the position also of threatening France with some degree of retribution for defying Donald's demands for no Palestinian state. So let's back up and talk about why we would even want to support or reject the Palestinian state, and what's important there. And And frankly, this is enormously important. It's something I've talked about for many years. I mean, going back decades. And remember now, I'm Jewish. And I support Israel. Yeah, I think there should be an Israeli Jewish state. Of course I do. Those people who came out of Europe and went to Israel, they went there because, frankly, 6 million Jewish people had been murdered in concentration camps by the Germans. They had to go somewhere. They couldn't come to the United States. The United States rejected those people. And when a lot of people did finally get to the United States, Jewish people from Germany, they couldn't even get a job. First of all, they couldn't get a job because of discrimination against Jews in the United States. Secondly, they couldn't get a job in the United States because many of them were professors who were very well-known professors in Europe, came to the United States, and the only place they could get work was at HBCUs. It was black people, the most discriminated against people in the entire history of the United States. It was black people who stepped up and helped Jewish people coming out of Europe to get jobs in American universities here in the United States. And that was definitely the case for some period of time, that these professors who came here, brilliant men, were only allowed to work with black people, black professors, black students. That's it. Those were the people who hired these Jewish refugees coming from Europe. So, interesting and important story, of course, in all of this. But beyond that, the United States and Britain and France were caught up in a problem. The problem has to do with colonialism. Now, you know, a lot of people use the word colonialism and people sort of nod their heads and don't even know what they're talking about. But let's understand exactly what they were talking about. Britain and France, and to a smaller degree the United States being supportive of those two countries, were owners of colonies in Africa, in Southeast Asia. India was part of that. A lot of different places around the world at the end of World War II. But here's something that was very interesting at the end of World War II. Franklin Roosevelt had promised countries like Vietnam that the United States was going to do with whatever was necessary to be sure that all of these colonial powers got out of these areas. Southeast Asia, Africa, India, all supposed to be released from this situation where they had been treated as colonies for many years. What do colonies do? They provide resources to the mother country. England got resources out of Africa. France got resources out of Southeast Asia and Africa and South America as well. Spain got resources out of South America. All of these countries, they had colonies. Remember, the United States was a colony back in the 1600s all the way up to 1776. So Roosevelt had promised, we're going to help everybody to get out of this business. Not going to be any colonies in the world. We're going to end this. Now, you can imagine, if you're Britain, creates a little problem. Britain's got an empire. They make enormous amounts of money out of their empire. You know, one of the things that was always said is that the sun never sets on the British Empire, meaning that you could go around the world. Britain had these colonies in every time zone around the world, so that when the sun set on one part of the world, it would go up in another part where Britain had its empire operating. Roosevelt promised many of these foreign leaders that this was the end of the road for these empire situations, that when the world got out of World War II, these colonies were going to be, quote, liberated. And, you know, one of the most important areas, if you want to think about this, as far as this liberation of colonies, was actually Vietnam. Ho Chi Minh had been promised by Roosevelt, we're going to get France out of here. You're going to be free to run your country. Vietnam is going to be an independent country, not run by France. Well, one thing led to another. Roosevelt died. So next thing you know, you've got Harry Truman, and Harry Truman decided that this wasn't going to happen, that he was not going to liberate all these countries from France, from England, from Spain. Wasn't going to do it. So all of these countries would maintain their colonies in Africa, in Southeast Asia, India. They all were in there. And, you know, people being as they are, they were expecting their freedoms and decided they were going to fight for their freedoms. And of course, in our foreign policy history, one of the most important areas for all of this turned out to be Vietnam. Vietnam, with Ho Chi Minh in the north and with France operating in the south, were in a fight. Basically in a fight over what Roosevelt had promised. You know, the United States came forward and said, we have to stop these communists. But that's not what this was about. It was never about communism. It was about Franklin Roosevelt's promise to Ho Chi Minh to remove France from its colonial position. And frankly, the Vietnamese did a heck of a job, because in 1954, they took care of the French by themselves. They surrounded the French, they massacred the French, and they kicked the French out of a place called Dien Bien Phu, which ended the colonial life of France in Southeast Asia, in Vietnam. However, by that time, Truman had morphed into Eisenhower, and Eisenhower continued to maintain this colonial presence, which was no longer French, but now became American. And then, of course, Eisenhower was followed by Kennedy, with everybody using the narrative that it was the communists that were the problem in Vietnam, not the colonialism that had been clearly identified by Franklin Roosevelt in the 1940s. All of this shifted. And the next thing you knew, Eisenhower was telling the world at the end of his presidency that if there was a vote in Vietnam, that the winner would be Ho Chi Minh. And that's why we refused to leave, because Eisenhower said we can't allow that, because Ho Chi Minh is a communist, and that's where this will end up, with communist control. So all of this had shifted from colonialism to an argument about communism, and it was all nonsense. Now, At the time, there were people who said, with great ferociousness in their arguments, this is all about communism. We have to stop the communists from taking control. They're going to take over South Vietnam, then it'll be Cambodia, then it'll be Laos, then it'll be Thailand, it'll be all of Southeast Asia, it'll be into Indonesia, it'll be all over that area. The communists will take control, the Chinese will gang up together with these other countries, and the United States will be toast. A lot of people said in 1960, it's not true. In 1965, first under Kennedy, who seemed to be moving off the dime on this, Kennedy talked about getting us out of all this thing. And then the next thing you know, Kennedy was dead. So then we had Lyndon Johnson, who promised that there would be no land war in Southeast Asia. But when he was elected president in 1964, and I can tell you right now, as a 13-year-old, I knocked on doors and passed out leaflets for Lyndon Johnson. And a lot of people may remember, and if you don't, go to Google. There was the Great Daisy advertisement against Goldwater, where the little girl pulled the petals off the daisy and said, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Next thing you know, boom, you see an explosion. Well, that was the story in 1964 and 65. But the reality is simple. It was never an issue. The communists weren't taking over anything. 1970, same argument. 1972, 74, same argument. But along the way, Ho Chi Minh was winning battles at every turn. And pretty soon, there was no choice. The United States and the South Vietnamese, supported by the United States, had to get out of Dodge, and we did. We hopped on airplanes and got the heck out of there. And next thing you know, Ho Chi Minh had control of the entire area of Vietnam. Called the communists, but guess what? You know where they went. They created an economy that provided manufacturing for consumers back into the United States. You know today that we buy an enormous amount of our goods from Vietnam. Far from being communists, Vietnam is a fairly capitalistic country with its own stock market, its own private companies, and actually a friendly relationship with the United States. All of the talk, 1950s, 60s, early 70s, proved to be completely wrong. We lost 58,000 people in that mess. It was all a lie. It was all made up. It was all a narrative that cost our country dearly. But not the way we thought. There was no communist uprising. In fact, if anything, there was sort of a capitalist uprising in Vietnam, which of course is where we buy a lot of our goods today. Okay, so let's get aside from that in a moment, and let's remember that China has also, along the way, created many capitalist institutions, not perfect, but somewhat. They have their own stock market. They have their own economic growth, which has made them the second biggest economy in the world. The United States being number 1, China being number 2, Germany being number 3, and number 4 being, California. Isn't that interesting? Donald Trump says California is made up of a bunch of losers, people who have destroyed that country, that state, that people there are dying on the vine economically, and yet they're the fourth most powerful economy on the face of the planet. You know, there are a lot of stories that are told by a lot of people. And we, as people, we listen to these, and many of them we believe. And they are so wrong. They are so far from anything true. And they put the United States in all kinds of jeopardy. And of course, we find ourselves in a new kind of jeopardy in 2025 as a result of stories that are being told by Donald Trump. And we'll get into some of those in a minute after I talk to you about some great businesses that support us on Showdown. And of course, I'm going to start with the great people at the St. Louis Suit Company. Okay, so we are back, and gee, what a shock. Technical difficulties. Donald Trump probably did it, but don't worry, because it was only a couple of minutes worth, and we're right here, and I'm going to continue, having already told you about the tremendous values at the St. Louis Suit Company in Clayton on the corner of Central and Forsyth. You can't beat them, not even with dead battery. The St. Louis Suit Company, they are unbeatable. And again, if you're looking for clothes for a wedding, your wedding attire, the best place to go in St. Louis for that for men is the St. Louis Suit Company in Clayton. Jay and Nick run a great business with the rest of their family, father and son. They make it work. 30 years in Clayton, the St. Louis Suit Company. Now, if you go east on Highway 40 from the St. Louis Suit Company, you will find yourself right down the road with some really excellent people at Jules on Hampton. That's at 4506 Hampton, and I can tell you that they have cases of jewelry and gems and watches and everything imaginable, and you can go in there and take a look at it, and the great people like Al, the owner, and his son AJ, I mean, they will show you everything at Jules on Hampton, 4506 Hampton. Now, they design jewelry. They will also help you to design jewelry if you're thinking of doing that yourself. They will buy and sell gold coins, gold with you. They'll buy and sell. They'll help you try to make a profit, do some good business. They make sure their prices are reasonable. They do. And if you don't believe it, just go in and talk to Al, and you'll find out very quickly that you'll see he's a trustworthy man, and you'll feel it, and you'll love dealing with them, and you'll come back again and again. So, Jules on Hampton, 4506 Hampton, design your jewelry, buy their designed jewelry, everything that you could want at a jewelry store. There it is with Al and AJ, 4506 Hampton in St. Louis. Now, get hungry? After all this work at the suit company and the jewelry store, head west, and you go to 141 and Olive, and you will find my great friends at Telena's. Telena's is the best Italian food restaurant in St. Louis by far. They have all the pastas. They have the best pizza, every kind of pizza that you can imagine. They don't just have one kind. They have all kinds. It's just a great place to go and buy Italian food. They have been there, not 30, 40 years. And that just gives you an idea of what a great place that is to eat. It really is phenomenal. It's Telena's, and they've got all these pastas, but they've also got something else which is far more important for me, and that's the spaghetti and meatballs. I love it. So go to Telena's at 141 and Olive, and you will find the best spaghetti and meatballs on the planet, I promise you. That's no joke. I eat them all the time when I have my weight down, and otherwise I just do my best to try to forget it. But honestly, if you're okay, if your weight's not a problem, get on in and buy those spaghetti and meatballs and all the other pastas at Telena's in Creve Coeur. You'll love them. Now, you can go further west, and you'll find yourself in Chesterfield Valley, and then you'll find a great restaurant that I love, and that's Wente's, W-E-N-T-E. Wente's hamburgers, cheeseburgers. They've got patty melts. They've got great salads. They've got the best iced tea I've ever had. And for me, my favorite food, well, everybody knows it's the ribs. It's the baby back ribs with onion rings and coleslaw, and it is so good. So again, so many great kinds of things that you can buy at Wendy's. You'll love it. They have pizza there too. Great iced tea. You'll love it. That's Ben and his wife. Go meet Ben at Wendy's and enjoy their terrific food. It's excellent at 18,000 Chesterfield Airport Road, and that is Wendy's. Okay. Back to the state of the world, which, you know, we sort of looked at that colonial problem that jumped up and grabbed the United States by the throat, because instead of following the promises made by Franklin Roosevelt, we decided that we would stick with the French and the British, and it didn't work out well. The French ended up out of Southeast Asia and out of Africa. The British ended up out of Africa, out of India, out of Canada, out of everywhere. The British Empire no longer could boast that the sun never set on them. They had a nice little country, nice little island in Europe, good economy, big navy, but that colonial story, it was destined to go. They just couldn't get around to listening to Roosevelt, and they paid a price for it. So did we in many respects in Vietnam. Okay, so here we go. Let's fast forward now, past all that mess, and here we are in 2025, and Donald Trump is trying to take us all the way back to the mess that existed in Europe, that existed in the United States 50 years ago, trying to create new problems between the United States and Canada, threatening to steal Denmark, to steal from Denmark, Greenland. You know, the whole conversation is just beyond ridiculous. There's no reason for us to be having this conversation. And especially, there's no reason for Donald to be out here threatening the whole world with tariffs, trying to tell everybody that the United States is the power of all the world and that everybody must bow down to us. Sort of like they used to bow down to the French, used to bow down to the English. Now Donald thinks that he can create an empire, and I can tell you right now, the cost of this is terrible. At the moment, we can see the cost between the United States and Canada. We can see the cost between the United States and India. We can see the cost between the United States and France and the rest of Europe, for that matter. And, you know, India says they got nothing by their prime minister being friends with Donald Trump. Their Prime Minister Modi, friends with Trump, definitely an autocrat, thinking that by sucking up to Trump that he would get something? Absolutely not. Trump is coming after India as hard as he's coming after anybody. Why? I'll tell you one reason, and we've talked about this before. You ever hear of the Trump phone company? Give me a break. What are we even talking about? But he does have a phone company, and Trump has decided that he's going to be the producer of cell phones in the United States, and he's going to kick everybody else's butt. Apple, Samsung, he's going to tariff everybody. Well, today Apple came out with their earnings, and for the moment, Apple's stock has managed to hold on. It was down to about 207 earlier, and they're now at 214 this afternoon after the stock market closed. But the truth of the matter is, Trump's coming after them. Trump wants to get everybody. And he thinks that because Apple moved the production of cell phones out of China, trying to please Trump, moved it to India, so now Trump's coming after Apple and India. This is a heck of a way to run a country. In fact, it's no way to run a country. And in fact, it's a way to pummel a country's economy. You know, Trump says that the United States economy a year ago was dead. That's his word. It was dead. He says that today the United States economy is hotter than any country in the world. Now, we just got a gross domestic product number for the last quarter that was plus 3%. A lot of people looked at it and said, that's a pretty good number. Of course, it was a minus 1% in the previous quarter. So when you put it together, you know, we're somewhere in the area in the last 6 months of about a 1.5% gain in GDP, which is really pretty poor. It's weak. It's plus, but it's weak. And there are tariff reasons for all this. I'm not even going to go into it, but that's, you know, part of the reason behind the weakness in our overall GDP numbers. And Donald has no recognition of any of this. All Donald's thinking about is the fact that the stock market by the S&P made a new high in the last week or so. Actually pushed up to a new high this morning, intraday, and then dropped down and closed in the negative territory after making that new high. A lot of people would say, nothing to make out of this. You know, Donald says we're in this greatest economic boom in the history of the world. So let's just go with that story and see where it gets us. Despite the fact that the Dow Jones has not made new highs, and more importantly, the Russell 2000, which represents the vast majority of regular companies in the United States, is far from new highs, and in fact is well below the highs of the last 5-6 years. That is such a negative for the stock market and a negative for our economic future. There's some other interest rates things that you can bake into this. We had an inverted yield curve that's now switched back the other way. Typically, when an inverted yield curve lasts for a long time and then flips, that is the beginning of a country heading into recession. The beginning. Not there yet, but the beginning. Not a lot of people want to talk about this because Donald just wants to say we're the hottest country on the planet, the hottest country in history. None of it is true. What is true is that we have the highest tariffs since Smoot-Hawley in 1930. And you may remember what we got in 1930, 31, 32, 33, 34, 5, 6, 7. The Great Depression. Everybody knows this. Every high school student knows that that's what we have gotten from these high tariffs in our history. But here's Donald back at work thinking that somehow he knows something that no one else on the planet has ever heard of. You know, he was at a meeting with Jay Powell, the head of the Federal Reserve, not long ago, warned Powell that he was in trouble because the renovations of the Federal Reserve Board in Washington, D.C., the buildings, were running way over the projected numbers that they had made up. Only problem was when he showed the numbers to Jay Powell, Powell looked at it and said, wait a minute, you've included in this number a building that we finished 5 years ago. This is not what we're working on now. This is something totally different. Trump muttered a few words and walked away, but the truth is, Powell was right. Trump didn't know what he was talking about, and if anything, he really was trying to set up the Fed chairman, and turned out Jay Powell was not as dumb as Donald Trump thought he was. He was not. He wasn't dumb at all. He knew exactly what he was looking at. So, you know, I just want to remind you that along with all of that, this morning the stock market surged upward. Surged upward because of big profit reports from Microsoft, and Amazon was likely to come out with really good earnings today. Meta, Facebook, very, very big earnings. Facebook was up $75 a share, over 10%. I mean, all of that this morning had the stock market hyped. The S&P opened at a brand new high. I can tell you the number was above 641, and by the time the market closed, it was down to 631. It's about equivalent to a 1,000-point decline in the Dow Jones Industrial Average from this morning. Is that the end of the world? Nope. Can't make that claim based on 1,000-point reversal, but I will tell you, there are some ugly signs in this stock market right now. And Donald Trump is boasting, bragging, making all kinds of ridiculous claims that everybody knows aren't true. And meanwhile, the economic facts in the United States are looking a little rough. But not to Donald. As far as Donald's concerned, you know, he's like that British Empire. Sun never sets on us, and we are roaring to go. But don't be so sure of that. Problem days are coming. And let me say further, you know, Donald wants the Federal Reserve to lower interest rates. They didn't. Fed came out yesterday and kept the rates unchanged. There was some hint that maybe in the future the rates might come down a little bit, but here's the problem. Long-term rates are sitting right up at 5%, 30-year bonds. And I promise you, if that rate pushes above 5%, and I think that it's on the verge of doing that, it's been just holding right there. Every time it's pushed back, it comes right back to 5%. If it happens, our economy is going to pay a giant price. And it'll be in the stock market, it'll be in economic profits, it'll be in unemployment. It won't be pretty. What Donald will say then? I guess he'll say, Joe Biden did it. And maybe Barack Obama, who, of course, is guilty of treason, and some of these other ridiculous statements that he likes to make. But I can just tell you right now that it's a very difficult and potentially problematic situation that we're facing here. Many economic numbers that Donald is not either looking at or discussing with the American people. Instead, well, he's just trying to get himself out from under Epstein, which maybe he will, probably he won't. But then he's got another problem, and that's all this mess that he's facing with regard to the stock market, with regard to Palestine, with regard to tariffs. You know, Donald can point around and say he's got everything under control and everybody's bowing to him. Don't believe it. It's not true. And when we see these numbers caving in, that's the one area he cannot deny. When stock market numbers are tumbling, he'll say it's someone else's fault. But it's under his watch. And he is buying this set of circumstances for us through all of these other activities that he's involved in, which are deceptive, duplicitous, and frankly, not true. So let me end with a couple of quick things, and we'll probably talk at more length in next week's programming. But one of them is the universities. You know, a lot of people have stood up and said, wow, Harvard's doing a good job. They're pushing back against Trump. They're filing lawsuits. They're not giving in. They're not doing what MIT and Columbia and some other places have done. They are standing up for their rights. Well, we've learned in the last few days, maybe that's not true. There's a story out today that Harvard may agree to a $500 million payment to Donald Trump compared to $200 million that was made by Columbia University, so it would be worse than Columbia. And then again, we got to look at what the other things might be that Harvard would cave into. Obviously, they've got billions of dollars of grants on the line, and they're trying to protect their interests, but they are destroying the university system in the country if they cave into Donald Trump. And one of the reasons that you can say that is because there are approximately, it is said right now, as many as 200 universities around the country that are getting ready to cave in and make their payments, extortion payments, to Donald Trump because of the cave-in by Columbia, MIT, and hopefully not, but possibly Harvard. We hope not, but it could be. So again, we're going to find out soon. Also, I mentioned early in the show, and we'll talk more about it, the administration is saying that there are no more dangers of greenhouse gases in our environment, that there is no such thing as climate change, that there are no greenhouse gases creating climate change, and that's actually the decision that started us on a path to trying to protect ourselves from climate disaster, trying to protect the world from climate disaster. Donald Trump has reversed this decision and put the United States on the path to, well, we don't even know. But we know one thing. The world is looking at climate change, finding very extreme results. Hurricanes, tornadoes, forest fires, extreme heat, extreme cold in other parts of the world, melting glaciers at the poles. This is trouble. And Trump has just made a big move, which has gone under the radar. Hardly anybody's talking about it, honestly. It's got some writing in the New York Times and in the Wall Street Journal, but for the most part, it's getting by, and this world is in great danger as a result of what Donald Trump just did related to these greenhouse gases. That's another one of his things that he signed with a pen. Not an auto pen, just his pen. And it's bad business, and it's dangerous business for the United States and the planet. But at the moment, I can't worry any further. I can just watch the stock market moving to new lows for the afternoon. But we'll talk more about that next Monday. Right now, I'm going to get out of here. This is Showdown, and I'm Mark Kasen. Good night.